We're reporting from the Shell Global Growth 2021 live event, and we're joined by István Kapitány, Executive Vice President for Mobility with Shell, and of course Henry Armour, NACS President and CEO. Welcome, guys. You're back on the road.
We sure are. We're excited about it.
Luckily, that's really great. Yes, I just came from Holland, can you imagine? So I travel. Very good.
Now, István, you've just been talking to 1,000 suppliers, 600 of your global Shell team members across the world. How was that?
It was fantastic. I mean, it's a live studio, so it was getting back to normality a bit more. It's not all virtual. Although I must say I liked it better when we had meetings like this in London physically, and we could have a nice conference, but also then afterwards a couple of drinks together and talk about the business in a more informal environment. And we are getting back there, so we are making good steps, but very happy to be back in the studio.
Very good. And Henry, and of course thinking about it from a Shell perspective as well, for NACS, is it important to have that global view of the world?
Well, Dan, I mean, I've talked a lot about NACS's global vision, and I've used a quote from this Canadian futurist, William Gibson, back in 1948, said, "The future is here, it's just unevenly distributed," which means elements of the future are emerging more quickly in different places around the world. So being global, having a global perspective, really helps you anticipate what's coming next. We see a lot of technology in Asia, we see a lot of food service in Europe, Europe leading in EVs, and it gives us kind of a lens, a telescope into what the future looks like around the world.
And István, from a Shell perspective, I know you always talk about this. You always say Shell has global scale, and it's a big advantage. It's true, isn't it?
Well, what Henry was saying is so true. I mean, I have a job where we are in 82 countries, and I tell you, if I try to run all the 82 countries based upon one country's current situation, we would be in trouble. But indeed, we have the future in our own operations. In China, for example, significantly more advanced in electric vehicle charging than any other parts of the world. Perhaps it is not entirely clearly communicated sometimes, but it's very important to know that there it is amazing. Convenience retail, of course, United States, Europe is going very, very fast. And the big growth, generally speaking, for the business is in the East. And then we didn't even talk about Africa, which will be coming up very quickly, very soon. So you really need to have, I always say, I run a global business, but we don't have one global customer.
Now, let me just pick you up on one thing you said earlier in the event, and I thought it was one of the most sort of important things you said. You said, this is the most exciting time of my career. Why?
Well, 34 years, and I spent most of my time in retailing. So there's petroleum retailing, convenience retailing in the Shell company. Never seen a change like this, so rapid change. So you do have energy transition, you have a mobility revolution, you have a digital revolution, you have different kind of new types of activities like home delivery coming to us. When it comes to retailing electricity, it's not just on service stations, you need to retail it everywhere. So we work with our partners, and the public ones already, like Waitrose, we will be providing them with EV charging services, and we use their services for our convenience retail business. So many things are moving that I believe that is providing a company like ours, with the resources we have and the reach we have, tremendous opportunities. So I see this transition as an opportunity rather than a threat.
Now, Henry, it's vital for the industry globally to have an organisation like NACS to help them during this time of transition. Do you enjoy your job just like István?
Well, I share István's enthusiasm. I have a little bit different perspective. I think when you have disruption, you can look at disruption negatively. I really look at it as resetting the table, and that just opens up a lot of new opportunities. And we have seen over the last decade or two the shortening of product life cycles, the shortening of consumers' attention spans. And what that requires really is a new solution to consumers' problems almost every day. And so what we're going through, I think, is a super exciting time because the table's getting reset all the time, and that presents great opportunities to increase your market share. It also gives you great opportunities to redefine what your company has been.
It's a very good thing if I just make one comment on that. So we are sitting in the United Kingdom, and of course I'm sitting in a Shell shirt with a Shell cafe on it. Alone it is a message. But you think about us as perhaps the number one fuel retailer of the United Kingdom. Now, I will tell you, this is a secret. We are not, in terms of market share, the number one fuel retailer in the United Kingdom. But we are now the number one EV charging company of the United Kingdom. So if you had said that 4 years ago, that would have been very, very strange to believe. That's the speed how it is changing right now.
Is it changing fast enough? Are EV charging networks rolling out fast enough globally, István? And I'll come back to you on that one as well, Henry.
I don't think so. So I see tremendous amount of energy going in there. We have many, many, many new type of competitors, so we can forget about our competitors generally. We do have utility companies, we have basically e-commerce companies, we do have digital companies going into this business. And it's great. So therefore the competition is significantly broader and more challenging than ever before. And a lot of money is going into building this EV infrastructure, but do not underestimate this gigantic task of producing an EV charging supply chain for the world. Because just to give you this, in the fossil fuels area, we are basically retailing 200 billion liters of fuels all around the world. To replace that with EV charging, with the infrastructure, with the grid capabilities, with basically a proper setup for our customers, will be a gigantic task. We are ready to play a big part, but this is really the beginning of the journey.
And beginning of the journey, isn't it, Henry? Because if we look at the fuels value chain, it took 100 years to get to this point, didn't it? So the charging value chain is quite immature still, isn't it?
Well, I think it is, Dan. I think what István was talking about is really the supply chain of it, which I think some of the political ambitions may be a little bit optimistic in terms of how are you going to generate the amount of electricity that their vision has for EVs in the timeline. But the other piece of it is the very micro piece of it is it took 100 years for the liquid fuel market to develop as it has, but it developed really in an open competitive marketplace, and the electricity marketplace is not open. It's largely regulated monopolies, and the ability to actually sell electricity at retail at a profit is really constrained by a lot of regulatory burdens. And that's one of the things NACS is very focused on, certainly right now in the United States, because of the Biden administration's infrastructure approach. We have to remove some regulatory barriers to make it an open, hospitable marketplace for private enterprise to succeed. When that happens, you're going to see EV charging networks accelerate the development of it. Prior to that time, it's really throwing CapEx at a problem that it's not going to be very sexy when you start seeing the losses you have on actually the sale of the electricity, unless you have enormous margins, which is not what the consumer wants, and it's not the consumer value.
Great point. Let's just stay on the US market, Henry. You're in the run-up to the NACS show, obviously the biggest global event for our industry. How do you feel about that? Optimistic?
Yeah, well, it's not just the best event for our industry. I think it's the greatest show on earth now that Ringling Brothers isn't around anymore. Yeah, we're very much. With NACS had our first in-person event in May, our leadership forum celebrating NACS's 60th anniversary, and the pent-up demand for this, for being in person with colleagues to share and explore knowledge together. In this virtual world, it was easy to kind of communicate one way, But the real value for leading players in the industry is not just to absorb the knowledge, but really to explore the knowledge. And you do that, as István said in the introduction, having a drink and talking about, hey, I heard this at the conference today. What do you think about that? So the pent-up demand for the NACS show, we are running ahead of where we were 3 weeks out, domestic registration in Chicago the last time. I think that's indicative of the industry's excitement about it. Obviously, we're going to have fewer international attendees because of travel restrictions, but you have to play the hand you're dealt with. But we're super excited about it.
And the US are great news. The US is a very important market for Shell as well, of course, István.
I mean, for the business generally is very important. For mobility is very important. We have 13,000 Shell branded sites, so we are the number one in the United States. And we have great plans. We see the United States as a growth market, so it's not like a mature market or saturated market. We want to grow there with the business, with basically our core business, with convenience retail as well, but also with EV charging, not surprisingly. So for us, these are the very important markets to crack is US, China, Europe for EV going forward, US for convenience retail, where we don't participate right now, but we do have very, very strong plans to do. So one of the most exciting markets for us still.
Now, final point, if we had a crystal ball here on the table and you're looking at the sector and your organization, your business in 10 years' time, perhaps starting with you, Henry, what would that look like?
Well, I think what we provide our members today are three things: knowledge, connections, and advocacy. 10 years from now, we're going to provide our members knowledge, connections, and advocacy. Right. The knowledge is going to be more sophisticated. It's from our executive education programs that are so vital to our more sophisticated members. Shell participates hugely in those because we need to increase the business acumen across finance and marketing and innovation and leadership. So we'll be very focused on that, very focused on technology. And as we have done in the past, as we do today, and as we will do in the future, is positioning the industry as a positive force in society, because there is no industry that touches more individuals every day than we do. And it's super important for us to make sure that we just not only respond to societal demands, we lead them. And that's what NACS will be continuing to do in the next 10 years.
István, what about the Shell business in 10 years' time?
Well, so very similar. We are a mobility business for more than 100 years. We help people to make their journeys better every day. Shell, you can be sure of Shell in this country in the 30s of the last century. Mobility is changing, but we would like to stay the number one mobility company in the world. And we are the number one mobility company in our industry by quite a mile. Now, this will be a different mobility than it was 100 years ago. People will have more choices. I normally use, as when we talk, a mosaic of choices and mosaic of fuels. So we believe we will be in 10 years' time, be very, very big in electric vehicle charging, battery swapping, hydrogen. We would be still, and I must say, in many, many parts of the world, we will be selling advanced liquid fuels. The one element I mentioned in the growth conference, that we are working with Ferrari to produce 100% liquid fuels for the racing by 2025. So you can imagine that in 2030 you can buy 100% sustainable liquid fuels or 100% sustainable electricity from Shell, because that's what you could do. And that's what we are good at, because we are basically able to produce both supply chains. Very few can do. And I see a service station, a mobility hub rather I would call, which is going to be very futuristic, but not that much. We already see some early signs, like heli taxis, where people basically can come with, or even basically using aviation for private usage. And for that, we can also become, for example, a hub. So very, very exciting. And when it comes to NACS, of course, NACS is very important. We are a very loyal partner with NACS. And the main reason is NACS is the only global professional organization to represent the interest of the mobility companies, of convenience retailers, of petrol retailers, EV retailers going forward. There aren't many companies like ours, which are in 82 countries. And I mentioned in the growth conference, we entered 5 countries this year. So we are growing. And if you watch the Olympics, there are over 200 countries, so there is a way to go.
Thank you very much for joining us. This is Dan Munford for Shop Talk Live.